Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, wow, we are unpacking one of the most fascinating literary and historical puzzles of the 20th century. We're going to deconstruct the universe of Harper Lee's Maycomb, Alabama. We'll be looking at the deeply embedded legal and moral complexities that make To Kill a Mockingbird an absolute masterpiece, and we'll explore how a startling later publication literally forced the world to rethink everything we thought we knew about its iconic heroes. Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. First, the three types of law. Second, the reality of Jim Crow. Third, Scout's moral awakening. Fourth, the Watchmen revelation. And finally, the power of counter-stereotypes. Section 1. The three types of law. Competing rule systems. So let's kick things off with natural law. You can really think of this as our innate, fundamental sense of right and wrong. Natural law focuses on absolute, unchangeable, and universal moral precepts, whether derived from religion or human reason, like the core ideals held by Enlightenment thinkers. The main tenet here is that a legitimate legal system must be fundamentally integrated with morality. It's all about emphasizing justice, fairness, and fundamental human dignity. Now let's move to our next concept and see how this builds. We have positive law. Back in the 19th century, positivism became a dominant philosophy by completely severing the connection between law and absolute morality. Positive law is simply the set of rules created by a legitimate authority and enforced by sanctions. And by definition, it's considered morally neutral. It's a relative view of the law that just reflects what a specific society wants at a specific point in time. It might perfectly reflect natural law, or it might entirely contradict it. And then, of course, we have social norms. You know, those unwritten, unofficial rules that really dictate what is and isn't acceptable in a community. Just like positive law, social norms can wildly conflict with the universal morals of natural law. In fact, these unwritten rules can often hold way more power over a community's daily life than the written statutes ever could. Which brings us to the profound cognitive dissonance right at the heart of the novel. On a national scale, the U.S. Constitution reflects natural law, guaranteeing equality and freedom. But in the 1930s setting of the book, the positive law of the Deep South explicitly perpetuated discrimination to preserve a white power structure. Atticus Finch represents that higher natural law, yet he is forced to navigate a local community governed by a complete travesty of positive law, along with deeply entrenched, unjust social norms. Section 2. The reality of Jim Crow. Laws in the Deep South. To really ground this philosophy in history, we have to look at the reality of the American South. After the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation brought this brief era of optimism, the late 19th century saw African Americans subjugated again by law. The term Jim Crow actually originated from a popular 19th century song and dance caricature done in blackface that mocked African Americans. This system of positive laws actively stripped away those hard-won freedoms. And this brilliantly illustrates the harsh reality of daily life back then. The separate but equal doctrine established by Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 was in practice distinctly less equal. African Americans were forced into separate doors, separate water fountains, separate schools, and separate libraries. It was an incredibly pervasive system of restriction. But, communities didn't just accept these unjust laws silently. Starting all the way back from Plessy in 1896, a massive social wave known as the Civil Rights Movement pushed back. Through protests, marches, and really grueling legal battles, the Supreme Court eventually overturned school segregation in 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education. And this was followed a decade later by the historic Civil Rights Act of 1964, which finally outlawed discrimination in public accommodations. So, while the Jim Crow laws persisted for decades and took a tremendous human toll, that collective push for natural law eventually forced a shift in positive law. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. so powerfully stated, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Section 3. Scout's Moral Awakening. A Child's View of Maycomb. Now let's talk about Scout. She is an incredibly unusual little girl for a prim and proper southern town in the 1930s. She learns to read before she even starts school, she confidently fights boys, and she completely rejects the social norm of wearing dresses in favor of overalls. She's this innocent, good-hearted kid who is just absolutely baffled by the racial prejudice and adult hypocrisy around her. And this makes her the absolute perfect, unclouded lens for us, the reader, to view Maycomb's deep-seated flaws. And Scout is exactly who she is because of Atticus. As a single dad, his hands-off parenting style nurtures her intellect and individuality, rather than trying to force her into these rigid societal molds. Atticus teaches her a really profound lesson in natural law. He tells her that while humanity has a great capacity for evil, that evil can actually be mitigated by sympathy and understanding. This is what preserves her conscience as she confronts the darker sides of her hometown. Section 4. The Watchmen Revelation, a shock to the world. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the jarring juxtaposition between these two versions of our main character. The Atticus we all know from Mockingbird is this paragon of natural law who risks everything to defend a wrongly accused black man. But the Atticus of Watchmen, he's an older man who shockingly supports the Segregationist Citizens Council and voices incredibly racist views to a grown-up scout. It's a tough pill to swallow. But it's absolutely vital to clarify here that Watchmen was not written as a sequel. Actually, it was Harper Lee's novice first draft, submitted back in 1957. Amazingly, the original manuscript was thought to be lost for decades, until it was suddenly discovered in a safe deposit box. Like a giant puzzle coming together, her editor originally suggested she focus on the flashbacks to childhood, meaning Watchmen was essentially cannibalized to write Mockingbird. This earlier draft represents Lee's painfully direct, unpolished attempt to confront the casual racism she witnessed from the people she loved in her own hometown. But Watchmen also reveals a whole other layer of Lee's original intent. We see a grown-up Jean Louise, Scout, exhibiting this strong, proto-feminist rejection of the Southern ideal of womanhood. She flat-out rejects her aunt's ladylike rules, ignores her beau's instruction to never contradict a man, and fiercely debates her father. It exposes a hidden agenda regarding gender roles that was really only hinted at by Scout's childhood overalls in the final famous novel. Section 5. The Power of Counter-Stereotypes, Overcoming Implicit Bias. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly by the Los Angeles Review of Books. The best antidote to a stereotype is to produce evidence contrary to that stereotype. Studies on implicit bias show that the most effective way to fight prejudice isn't necessarily through direct, head-on argument, but by presenting compelling counterfactual evidence. You have to show people something different. And To Kill a Mockingbird did exactly this. It brilliantly deployed counter-stereotypes that the popular culture of the 1960s could actually understand and digest. It gave the world an idealized white Southern lawyer fighting for justice, and it portrayed its black characters, like Tom Robinson, as fundamentally honest, generous, and virtuous, which directly contradicted the toxic biases of that era. Think about it. If the ugly truth of the Watchmen manuscript had been published in the 1950s instead, it likely would have failed to capture the public's imagination. A racist Atticus Finch, while perhaps a more realistic reflection of a 1930s Southern lawyer, would have merely dampened the call to justice. It wouldn't have inspired generations of readers and real-life lawyers to imagine that a better, more equitable world was even possible. Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought to ponder. Do we need our literary heroes to be flawless illusions in order to learn real moral truths from them? The Atticus of Mockingbird may be an idealized fiction, but his alignment with natural law helped shape the very real pursuit of justice in our modern world. I want you to think about that as you reflect on the stories that have shaped your own moral compass. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.